The rain had not stopped since noon, and Alina Voss could feel it soaking through the shoulders of her coat as she stood outside the restaurant door, staring at her own reflection in the dark glass. Her mother stood beside her, gripping her arm too tightly, saying nothing. Something about the silence felt wrong. Alina had imagined this meeting for days, picturing herself walking into a bright office, shaking hands, starting a new chapter of her life. But now, standing in front of a restaurant with blacked-out windows and two men in dark coats guarding the entrance, none of it felt like what she had pictured. "Mom," Alina whispered, "why does this feel like a funeral?" Marguerite did not answer. She only tightened her grip and pulled her daughter toward the door. Inside, the restaurant was almost empty except for a long table near the back, covered in white linen, candles burning low, and 6 men seated around it. At the head of the table sat a man Alina did not recognize, but somehow, the moment she saw him, she understood exactly who he was. He had the calm, unhurried posture of someone who had never once had to raise his voice to be obeyed. His eyes moved to her the second she stepped through the door, and he did not look away. "Vittorio Castellano," Marguerite murmured under her breath, as if saying his name too loudly might summon something dangerous. Alina's stomach turned. She had heard that name before, whispered in corners of the neighborhood, spoken with fear by shopkeepers who paid protection money every month, mentioned in hushed tones by her mother whenever bills piled up and money disappeared. She had always imagined him as a distant shadow, someone from stories, not a real man sitting 15 feet away from her, studying her like she was a piece of merchandise being appraised. "Sit," Vittorio said, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it filled the room in a way that made every other sound disappear. Alina hesitated. Marguerite pushed her forward gently, whispering, "Just sit down. It will be fine. This is a good opportunity for you." Alina sat. The chair was cold beneath her, and her hands trembled slightly as she folded them on her lap. She glanced at her mother, hoping to find some reassurance in her face, but Marguerite was staring at the table, avoiding her daughter's eyes completely. "You are Alina," Vittorio said. It was not a question. "Yes, sir," she answered, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded despite the storm building inside her chest. "Your mother has told me many things about you," he continued, leaning back in his chair. "She says you are smart, good with numbers, reliable." Alina forced a small smile. "I studied accounting. I worked at a firm downtown for 2 years before it closed." "I know," Vittorio said simply. "I know everything about you, Alina. I have known about you for quite some time." The words landed strangely, like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through her that she could not explain. She looked at her mother again, searching for an explanation, but Marguerite still would not meet her eyes. "Mom told me there might be a job," Alina said carefully, trying to steer the conversation somewhere familiar, somewhere she could understand. "Bookkeeping," she said, "for your restaurants." A faint smile crossed Vittorio's face, but it did not reach his eyes. He glanced at one of the men beside him, a broad-shouldered man named Marcus, who chuckled quietly and looked down at his plate. "Your mother," Vittorio said slowly, "has told you a very small part of the truth." Alina's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" Marguerite finally lifted her head, and for the first time, Alina saw something in her mother's eyes that frightened her more than anything Vittorio had said so far. It was not sadness. It was resignation, the look of someone who had already accepted something terrible and was only waiting for it to be spoken aloud. "Tell her," Vittorio said to Marguerite, his voice suddenly sharper. "Tell your daughter why she is really here." The restaurant felt smaller with every passing second. Alina could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, could feel the eyes of every man at that table watching her, waiting to see how she would react to whatever was about to be said. She wanted to stand up, to walk out, to run through the rain until she was far away from this place. But something kept her frozen in her seat, some desperate need to hear the truth from her mother's own mouth. "I owe him money," Marguerite said quietly. "A lot of money, more than I could ever pay back working 2 jobs for the rest of my life." Alina's mind raced backward through years of memories, trying to make sense of what she was hearing. She thought of the strange men who sometimes came to their apartment late at night, the envelopes her mother would hand over without explanation, the way Marguerite always seemed to be running from something, always looking over her shoulder, always short on cash despite working constantly. It had never fully made sense to Alina before. Now, pieces were falling into place in a pattern she did not want to see. "How much?" Alina asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It does not matter how much," Vittorio interrupted before Marguerite could answer. "What matters is that debts in my world always get paid, one way or another." Alina felt her throat tighten. "And you brought me here because—" She could not finish the sentence. She did not want to finish it. Some part of her already understood exactly where this conversation was heading, and she desperately hoped she was wrong. Marguerite reached across the table trying to take her daughter's hand, but Alina pulled away instinctively. "Alina, listen to me. This is not what you think. Mr. Castellano is a fair man. He is offering you a position in his household, a respectable position. You would want for nothing. You would be safe." "A position in his household," Alina repeated slowly, the words feeling foreign and heavy on her tongue. "You mean I am the payment? You mean you are giving me to him to settle your debt?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Alina looked around the table at the men who sat there watching her, some with mild curiosity, some with open amusement, as if this were nothing more than an ordinary business transaction to them. She thought of every conversation she'd had with her mother over the past week, every excited word about a wonderful opportunity, every reassurance that this meeting would change her life. It had all been leading here to this moment, to this table, to this humiliation unfolding in front of strangers. "Mom," Alina said, her voice cracking despite her effort to stay composed, "how could you do this to me?" Marguerite's eyes filled with tears, but she did not look away this time. "I did not have a choice, Alina. They were going to hurt me. I could not let that happen. You are the only thing I have left that is worth anything to them." The words cut deeper than anything Alina had ever heard in her life. She was not a daughter in that sentence. She was currency. She was a debt paid in flesh instead of dollars, traded across a table like an old piece of furniture nobody wanted anymore. Vittorio watched this exchange without interrupting, his expression unreadable, his fingers tapping slowly against the stem of his wine glass. Alina could feel his eyes on her, assessing, calculating, though what exactly he was calculating she could not say. "You have not asked me what I think of this arrangement," Alina said suddenly, surprising even herself with the boldness in her voice. She turned to face Vittorio directly, ignoring the tremble in her hands. "Nobody has asked me anything. You have all decided my life for me while I sat here smiling like an idiot, thinking I was here for a job interview." One of the men at the table, a thin man with sharp eyes named Nathan, leaned toward Vittorio and murmured something under his breath. Vittorio raised a single hand, silencing him instantly. "She has spirit," Vittorio said, almost to himself. He studied Alina for a long moment, his expression shifting into something Alina could not quite read. "Continue," he said to her. "Tell me exactly what you think." Alina's heart pounded so hard she was certain everyone at the table could hear it. She had no plan, no strategy, nothing but raw anger and fear colliding inside her chest. But she refused to sit there silently while her future was decided by people who had never once considered asking for her opinion. "I think," Alina said slowly, choosing each word with care, "that whatever my mother owes you, it has nothing to do with me. I did not take your money. I did not make promises I could not keep. If you want to punish someone for this debt, punish the person who created it. Not me." The restaurant fell into a silence so complete that Alina could hear the rain tapping against the windows outside. Marguerite had gone pale, her hand pressed against her mouth, as if trying to physically stop herself from making things worse. The men around the table exchanged glances, waiting to see how Vittorio would respond to a woman speaking to him with such open defiance. Vittorio leaned forward slowly, resting his elbows on the table, his eyes never leaving Alina's face. For a long moment, nobody moved. Alina braced herself for anger, for punishment, for something terrible to happen because of the words she had just spoken. Instead, something unexpected flickered across his face. It almost looked like respect. "Tell me something, Alina," Vittorio said quietly. "If I told you that you could walk out of this restaurant right now, with no debt owed, no obligation, no strings attached, what would you do?" Alina blinked, caught off guard by the question. She glanced at her mother, then back at Vittorio, trying to understand if this was some kind of trap, some cruel test designed to humiliate her further before the real punishment began. "I would walk out," Alina said honestly, "and I would never come back." Vittorio nodded slowly, as if this answer satisfied something inside him that Alina could not begin to understand. He turned to Marguerite, and the warmth that had briefly touched his expression disappeared entirely, replaced by something cold and final. "You brought your daughter here," he said to Marguerite, "and offered her to me as payment for your mistakes. You sat across from me and pretended this was a gift, when in truth it was an act of cowardice. I have built my life on the belief that debts belong to those who create them, not to their children, not to their families. You have insulted me by suggesting otherwise." Marguerite's face crumbled. "Please, Mr. Castellano, I did not know what else to do. I am begging you, please reconsider." "I have reconsidered," Vittorio said flatly. "Your debt is forgiven." The words hung in the air, and for a moment nobody understood them, least of all Alina, who sat frozen in her chair, waiting for some catch, some hidden condition that would make the sentence make sense again. "Forgiven," Marguerite repeated, stunned. "Forgiven," Vittorio confirmed. "But you will leave this restaurant tonight, and you will never come near me or my business again. Consider this the last kindness I will ever show you." Marcus and Nathan exchanged surprised glances, clearly as shocked by this decision as everyone else at the table. Vittorio rose from his seat and nodded toward the door, and within seconds, two of his men were escorting a sobbing, disoriented Marguerite out of the restaurant, leaving Alina alone at the table with a man she had believed, only minutes earlier, would decide the rest of her life. Alina sat frozen, unsure whether to feel relief or terror. She had watched her mother be led away, and though part of her felt a strange flicker of satisfaction at seeing her mother finally face the consequences of her choices, a much larger part of her felt sick with confusion. She did not understand what had just happened. She did not understand why Vittorio Castellano, a man with a reputation for ruthlessness, had chosen mercy in a moment when cruelty would have been so much easier. "You are probably wondering why I did that," Vittorio said, sitting back down across from her. "Yes," Alina admitted, "I am. I do not deal in people who are given to me against their will," he said simply. "I deal in loyalty, in respect, in choices made freely. Your mother offered me something I did not want. What I want is standing right in front of me, but only if she chooses it herself." Alina stared at him, trying to understand the distinction he was drawing, trying to figure out if this was kindness or simply a different kind of manipulation dressed up in prettier words. "What do you mean?" Alina asked carefully, "if she chooses it herself?" Vittorio studied her for a long moment before answering, his expression calm, almost patient. "I mean that you mentioned a job earlier, bookkeeping. That offer was real before your mother turned it into something else. If you want it, it is yours on your own terms, earned through your own skill, owing nothing to anyone." Alina's mind spun, trying to process the sudden shift from terror to something resembling an actual choice. She thought of her empty apartment, the unpaid bills stacking up on her kitchen counter, the accounting firm that had closed without warning 6 months earlier, leaving her scrambling for any kind of stable income. She thought of her mother's tears, her mother's betrayal, and the strange, twisted relief of finally understanding the truth about the woman who raised her. "And if I say no?" Elena asked. "Then you walk out that door," Vittorio said, "and you never see me again. No debt, no obligation, no consequence." Elena sat in silence, staring at the flickering candle between them, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. Everything about this night had unfolded like something out of a nightmare, and yet here she was, being offered a strange kind of freedom she had not expected to find at the bottom of all this wreckage. She did not answer him that night. She simply stood, thanked him for his honesty, and walked out into the rain alone, leaving both her mother and Vittorio Castellano behind her, uncertain of which direction her life would take next. The city outside felt different somehow, colder and sharper, as if the rain itself had rewritten the rules of her world in the span of a single dinner. Elena did not go home. She could not face the empty apartment, the silence, the questions that would come from staring at four familiar walls that suddenly felt like part of a life built on lies. Instead, she walked for hours, letting the rain soak through her coat completely, letting her mind replay every word spoken at that table until the sentences began to blur together into something she could barely make sense of anymore. By the time she finally returned to her apartment, the sky had begun to lighten with the first gray hints of morning. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone, watching missed call after missed call from her mother appear on the screen, each one a fresh reminder of the betrayal that had upended everything she believed about her family. She did not answer a single one. She turned the phone off entirely and lay back against her pillow, staring at the ceiling, wondering how a woman who was supposed to protect her could so easily hand her over to a stranger to settle a debt. Sleep did not come easily that night, and when it finally did, it was filled with fragmented images of candlelight, cold eyes, and her mother's trembling voice repeating the same sentence over and over. "It does not matter how much. It does not matter how much. It does not matter how much." Elena woke the next morning with a strange clarity settling over her, the kind of clarity that only comes after everything familiar has been stripped away and rebuilt into something unrecognizable. She understood for the first time in her life that she could no longer rely on her mother for safety, for honesty, or for protection. Whatever came next, she would have to build it herself, brick by brick, decision by decision, starting completely from scratch. She thought about Vittorio Castellano's offer, turning it over in her mind again and again, weighing the danger of stepping into his world against the desperation of her current situation. She had no job, no savings, and now, for the first time, no mother she could trust. The offer on the table was not simple, and it was not without risk, but it was, at the very least, honest. He had not hidden his intentions behind pretty words the way her mother had. He had laid everything out plainly and let her decide. By the time the sun had fully risen over the city, Elena had made up her mind, though she did not yet know the full weight of what that decision would mean for the rest of her life. She picked up her phone, dialed a number she had memorized without meaning to the night before, and waited, her heart pounding, for someone on the other end to answer. The phone rang twice before a calm, familiar voice answered. "You are up early, Elena." She recognized the voice immediately, though it took her a moment to find her own. "I want the job," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "The bookkeeping position, on my own terms like you said." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, just long enough for Elena to wonder if she had made a mistake calling so soon. Then Vittorio spoke again, his tone carrying something that almost sounded like approval. "Come to the restaurant this afternoon. We will discuss the details." The line went dead before she could respond, leaving her standing in the middle of her small apartment, phone still pressed to her ear, wondering exactly what kind of life she had just agreed to step into. She spent the rest of the morning trying to distract herself from the storm of thoughts swirling in her mind. She showered, dressed in the most professional clothes she owned, a gray blazer she had worn to job interviews before her old firm collapsed, and sat at her small kitchen table trying to eat breakfast, though the food tasted like nothing at all. Every few minutes, her phone buzzed with another message from her mother, each one more desperate than the last. "Alina, please call me back. Alina, I am sorry. Alina, you do not understand what I was facing." She read each message once and then set the phone face down on the table, refusing to let herself be pulled back into a conversation she was not ready to have. By early afternoon, she found herself standing outside the same restaurant from the night before, though it looked entirely different in the daylight. The windows, which had seemed so ominous under the cover of darkness and rain, now let in soft afternoon light, illuminating simple wooden tables and clean white tablecloths. It looked, in the daylight, almost like an ordinary place, the kind of restaurant a person might walk into for a quiet lunch without a second thought. A young woman greeted her at the door, introducing herself as Grace, one of the restaurant's daytime staff. She led Alina through the main dining area and into a back office, where Vittorio sat behind a wide wooden desk, reading through a stack of papers with a pair of reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked different in this setting too, less like the imposing figure from the night before, and more like an ordinary businessman managing an ordinary business. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk without looking up from his papers. Alina sat, folding her hands in her lap, trying to steady the nervous energy building inside her chest. "You surprised me," Vittorio said finally, setting his papers aside and looking at her directly. "Most people, after a night like last night, would run as far from this world as possible." "I thought about it," Alina admitted honestly, "but running does not pay my bills, and I am good at what I do. I would rather earn something honestly than spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been." Vittorio studied her for a long moment, and Alina could not tell if he was pleased or simply calculating something behind his calm expression. "The position is exactly what it sounds like," he said eventually. "You will manage the books for 3 of my restaurants. Payroll, inventory, expenses, taxes. Legitimate work, nothing more, nothing less. You will report directly to me, and you will be paid a fair salary, deposited into your own account under your own name." "And in exchange?" Alina asked carefully, unable to shake the instinct that there had to be some hidden cost buried somewhere in this arrangement. "In exchange, you do your job well," Vittorio said simply. "That is all I require, nothing more." Alina studied his face, searching for any sign of deception, any hint that this offer carried strings she had not yet discovered. She found nothing but calm, steady patience, the same quality that had unsettled her the night before, now feeling strangely reassuring in the daylight. "Why did you help me last night?" she asked suddenly, the question slipping out before she could stop herself. "You could have simply accepted what my mother offered. Instead, you sent her away and gave me a choice. Why?" Vittorio leaned back in his chair, considering the question carefully before answering. "Because I have built everything I have on respect, Alina. Not fear, though fear certainly exists in my world. Respect. A person who is forced into something will resent it forever, and resentment makes for poor employees and worse allies. A person who chooses something freely, who earns their place through their own effort, becomes something far more valuable. Loyalty that is bought is worthless. Loyalty that is earned is priceless." Alina absorbed his words slowly, feeling something shift inside her, a small but significant realization that perhaps this man, despite everything she had heard whispered about him in the neighborhood, operated by a code she had not expected to find in someone in his position. "I start tomorrow?" she asked. "You start today," Vittorio said, standing and gesturing toward the door. "Grace will show you to the office where you will be working. The previous bookkeeper left rather abruptly 2 weeks ago, and the books have fallen behind. I trust you will find them in need of your particular skills." Alina rose from her chair, feeling a strange mixture of relief and disbelief settle over her. She had walked into this restaurant the night before expecting the worst night of her life, and here she was, less than 24 hours later, walking out with a legitimate job and a clear set of expectations she could actually meet. Grace led her down a narrow hallway to a small office tucked behind the kitchen, filled with filing cabinets, a computer that looked slightly outdated, and stacks of receipts and invoices that had clearly been neglected for weeks. Alina sat down at the desk, and despite everything that had happened, despite the exhaustion pulling at every muscle in her body, she felt something she had not expected to feel that day. A small, quiet sense of purpose. She spent the rest of the afternoon organizing the chaos left behind by the previous bookkeeper, losing herself in columns of numbers and spreadsheets in a way that felt almost meditative after the emotional turmoil of the past day. Numbers did not lie. Numbers did not betray you. Numbers simply were what they were, waiting patiently to be understood and organized into something that made sense. It was, in a strange way, exactly what Alina needed. As evening approached, Grace poked her head into the office to let her know the restaurant would be closing soon for the night. Alina looked up, surprised to realize how much time had passed, how deeply she had thrown herself into the work as a way of avoiding everything else swirling in her mind. "You are good at this," Grace said, glancing at the neatly organized stacks of paper on the desk. "The last person who sat here left everything a mess. Mr. Castellano will be pleased." Alina smiled faintly, gathering her things. "I hope so." As she walked out through the main dining area, she noticed Vittorio standing near the entrance, speaking quietly with Marcus and another man she did not recognize. He glanced up as she passed, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. He gave her a small nod, nothing more, but somehow it felt like the first genuine gesture of respect she had received from anyone in a very long time. Alina stepped out into the evening air, and for the first time since the night before, she allowed herself to breathe fully, without the weight of fear pressing down on her chest. Her phone buzzed again as she walked toward the bus stop, another message from her mother. This time, however, instead of ignoring it, Alina paused, staring at the screen for a long moment. "Alina, please. I made a terrible mistake, but I am still your mother. Please let me explain." Alina's fingers hovered over the screen, torn between the anger still burning inside her and some small, stubborn part of her heart that still ached for the woman who had raised her, despite everything. She typed a short reply, deleted it, typed another, deleted that one too. Finally, she settled on a single sentence, brief and final. "I need time. Do not contact me until I am ready." She hit send before she could second-guess herself, then turned off her phone entirely, tucking it into her bag as she boarded the bus home. The following weeks fell into a strange rhythm for Alina. Each morning, she woke early, dressed carefully, and made her way to the restaurant, where she buried herself in spreadsheets and financial reports, slowly untangling months of neglected bookkeeping. She discovered discrepancies in the previous bookkeeper's records, small inconsistencies that hinted at mismanagement or possibly something worse, though she kept careful notes rather than jumping to conclusions. She met the rest of the staff, a rotating cast of cooks, servers, and managers who treated her with a mixture of curiosity and cautious respect, clearly aware of the circumstances surrounding her sudden arrival but too polite, or perhaps too wise, to ask questions directly. Vittorio checked in with her periodically, always brief, always focused entirely on business. He would ask about specific numbers, specific discrepancies, specific plans for organizing the restaurant's finances more efficiently. He never once brought up the events of that first night, never once referenced her mother or the debt that had originally brought Alina into his world. It was as if that night had simply been erased, replaced entirely by a straightforward, professional relationship built on competence and mutual respect. Slowly, almost without realizing it, Alina began to feel something she had not felt in years: stability. For the first time since her old accounting firm had collapsed, she had a steady paycheck, a clear set of responsibilities, and a growing sense of confidence in her own abilities. She rented a small studio apartment across town, far from the neighborhood where her mother lived, and began the slow, deliberate process of building a life entirely her own, disconnected from the chaos and instability that had defined her childhood. But peace, as Alina would soon discover, rarely lasts long in a world built on debts, favors, and dangerous men, who did not easily forget the people who had crossed them. One evening, nearly a month after she had started working at the restaurant, Alina stayed late finishing a particularly complicated set of tax documents. The restaurant had emptied out hours earlier, the kitchen staff long gone, only a single security guard remaining near the front entrance. Alina barely noticed the time slipping away as she cross-referenced figures, determined to finish before heading home. A soft knock on her office door pulled her attention away from the screen. She looked up to find Marcus standing in the doorway, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "Mr. Castellano wants to see you," Marcus said. "Now." Alina's stomach tightened instantly, old fears resurfacing despite the weeks of calm that had settled over her recent life. "Is something wrong?" Marcus did not answer directly, simply gesturing for her to follow him. Alina rose from her desk, her heart pounding as she followed him down the hallway toward Vittorio's office, wondering what could possibly have gone wrong after weeks of steady, uneventful work. She found Vittorio standing behind his desk, his expression darker than she had ever seen it, a folder open in front of him containing documents Alina recognized instantly as some of the discrepancies she had flagged weeks earlier in her notes. "Sit down, Alina," he said quietly. "We need to talk about what you found in these records." Alina sat, her mind racing through every possible explanation for the numbers she had uncovered, suddenly aware that whatever she had stumbled upon while organizing the restaurant's finances might be far more serious than simple mismanagement. "I found some inconsistencies," Alina said carefully. "Money moving in ways that did not match the invoices. I made notes, but I was still trying to understand the full picture before bringing it to you." Vittorio slid the folder across the desk toward her. The previous bookkeeper did not leave abruptly because he found a better job, Alina. He left because he was skimming money from these restaurants for over a year, and when I discovered it, he disappeared before I could confront him directly. Alina's breath caught in her throat. "You think I am involved in this?" "No," Vittorio said firmly, shaking his head. "I know you are not involved. Your notes are thorough and honest, exactly the kind of work I would expect from someone with nothing to hide. But I need you to understand something important. The man who did this, his name is Daniel Whitfield, and he did not simply run away out of guilt. He took information with him. Information about my business that could cause serious problems if it fell into the wrong hands." Alina's pulse quickened as the implications of his words settled over her. "What kind of information?" "The kind that matters very little to you right now," Vittorio said, his tone leaving no room for further questions on that particular subject. "What matters is that Daniel Whitfield knows you have taken over his position. If he believes you have uncovered what he was hiding, he may see you as a threat." "A threat," Alina repeated slowly, the weight of the words settling uncomfortably in her chest. "You think he might come after me?" Vittorio's expression remained calm, but something in his eyes carried a warning Alina had not seen from him before. "I think," he said carefully, "that from this moment forward you will not be working alone in this office after dark. I will assign someone to escort you home each evening until this matter is resolved." Alina wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she could take care of herself, that she had survived plenty of difficult situations without needing protection from anyone. But something in Vittorio's tone told her this was not a request open for debate. "All right," she said finally, her voice quieter than she intended. As she left his office that night, walking beside Marcus toward her small apartment across town, Alina could not shake the uneasy feeling settling over her chest. She had believed, foolishly perhaps, that stepping into Vittorio's world meant leaving danger behind, trading fear for stability, chaos for order. Instead, it seemed she had simply traded one kind of uncertainty for another, one that came with its own set of shadows lurking just beyond the edges of her carefully rebuilt life. She thought of her mother's warnings over the years, vague and fragmented mentions of danger that Alina had never fully understood as a child. She thought of Daniel Whitfield, a man she had never met, whose careless greed had apparently created a threat that now hung over her own life without her ever having done anything to deserve it. For the first time since accepting Vittorio's offer, Alina wondered if she had truly understood what she was walking into. 3 days passed without incident, though Alina noticed a shift in the atmosphere around the restaurant. The staff seemed more watchful, conversations grew quieter whenever she entered a room, and Marcus, or sometimes Nathan, walked her to and from work each day without fail, scanning the streets around them with the practiced eyes of someone accustomed to spotting trouble before it arrived. Alina tried to focus on her work, burying herself in spreadsheets and financial reports, but the constant undercurrent of tension made it difficult to concentrate for long. On the fourth night, everything changed. Alina was walking home earlier than usual, having finished her work while the sun was still setting, escorted as always by Nathan, who kept a respectful distance while remaining alert to their surroundings. They had just turned onto the quiet side street leading toward Alina's apartment building, when a figure stepped out from between two parked cars, blocking their path. Alina froze instantly, recognizing something dangerous in the way the man carried himself, though she had never seen his face before. He was tall, with sharp, calculating eyes and an unsettling stillness to his posture, the kind of stillness that suggested controlled anger simmering just beneath the surface. "Daniel," Nathan said quietly, stepping slightly in front of Alina, his voice carrying a warning as she had never heard from him before. So this was Daniel Whitfield. Alina's heart pounded as she studied the man responsible for the tension that had settled over her life for the past several days. He looked younger than she had imagined, perhaps only a few years older than herself, though there was a hardness in his expression that suggested years of difficult choices had aged him well beyond his actual years. "I just want to talk to her," Daniel said, his eyes flicking toward Alina, his tone carrying a strange mixture of desperation and barely restrained anger. "That is all. 5 minutes." "You do not get to talk to her," Nathan said firmly. "You should not even be in this neighborhood. Castellano finds out you came near her, things will get very complicated for you." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he did not step back. "I did not steal that money for myself," he said suddenly, his eyes locking onto Alina's with an intensity that caught her off guard. "You need to understand that before you judge me. I was protecting my sister. She owed money to people far worse than Castellano, and I did what I had to do to save her life." Alina felt a strange, unwelcome flicker of sympathy despite everything Vittorio had told her about this man. She thought of her own mother, of debts and desperation driving people toward choices that seemed impossible to justify from the outside, but felt like the only option from within the chaos of the moment. "That is not my problem," Alina said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. "Whatever your reasons, you put me in danger by disappearing the way you did. I did not ask for any of this." Daniel's expression softened slightly, though the tension in his shoulders remained. "I am not here to hurt you," he said quietly. "I need you to pass a message to Castellano. Tell him I am willing to return what is left of the money in exchange for him leaving my sister alone. She has nothing to do with this. She should not suffer because of my mistakes." "Why should I help you?" Alina asked, genuinely curious despite the danger of the situation. "You put my safety at risk. Why should I do anything for you?" Daniel studied her for a long moment before answering. "Because I think you understand what it means to be caught in the middle of something you did not create. I have heard what your mother did to you. I know what it feels like to make impossible choices when the people you love are in danger." The words struck Alina harder than she expected, an unwelcome mirror reflecting her own recent trauma back at her from a man she had every reason to distrust. She glanced at Nathan, who remained tense and alert, clearly ready to intervene if the situation shifted toward danger. "I will tell him," Alina said finally, "but I am not making any promises about what he decides to do with that information." Daniel nodded, a flicker of gratitude crossing his features. "That is all I am asking." He disappeared back into the shadows between the parked cars as quickly as he had appeared, leaving Alina and Nathan standing alone on the quiet street, the tension slowly draining from the air around them. "We need to get you home," Nathan said, his voice tight with residual alertness. "And Castellano needs to hear about this immediately." They walked the rest of the way to Alina's apartment in tense silence, and once she was safely inside, Nathan insisted on staying outside her door until additional security arrived to watch the building through the night. Alina sat on the edge of her bed, replaying the encounter over and over in her mind, trying to understand the strange mixture of fear and unexpected sympathy she felt toward a man who had, in some indirect way, put her life at risk. The following morning, Alina arrived at the restaurant to find Vittorio already waiting for her in his office, his expression grave as Nathan briefed him on the events of the previous evening. Alina relayed Daniel's message carefully, watching Vittorio's face for any reaction as she spoke about the stolen money, the sister in danger, and the desperate plea for mercy. Vittorio listened without interruption, his fingers steepled together as he considered everything Alina told him. When she finished, he remained silent for a long moment, staring out the window of his office as if working through some complicated calculation only he could see. "You believe him," Vittorio said finally, not quite a question. Alina hesitated before answering honestly. "I do not know if I believe every detail of his story, but I believe he was genuinely desperate. I know what desperation looks like. I have seen it recently, in my own family." Vittorio's expression shifted slightly at the reference to Marguerite, though he said nothing directly about it. "Desperation," he said instead, "is not an excuse for betrayal. Daniel worked for me. I trusted him with access to sensitive financial information, and he abused that trust for his own reasons, regardless of how sympathetic those reasons might appear on the surface." "I am not asking you to forgive him," Alina said carefully, surprised by her own boldness in pushing the conversation further. "I am simply passing along his message, as I promised I would. What you decide to do with it is entirely up to you." Vittorio studied her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering behind his calm expression. "You have a strong sense of fairness, Alina, stronger, perhaps, than is wise in this particular world." "Maybe," Alina admitted, "but I would rather be fair and occasionally foolish than cold and always safe." A faint, almost imperceptible smile crossed Vittorio's face, there and gone so quickly that Alina wondered if she had imagined it entirely. "I will consider his offer," he said finally. "But understand this. If he attempts to contact you again without my permission, the consequences will fall entirely on him, and I will not intervene on his behalf a second time." Alina nodded, understanding the weight of his warning, even as relief washed through her at the possibility that this dangerous situation might resolve without further violence or escalation. Over the following days, the tension around the restaurant gradually eased, though Alina remained cautious, still accompanied home each evening by Nathan or Marcus as a precaution. She learned, through fragments of conversation overheard among the staff, that Vittorio had reached some kind of arrangement with Daniel, one that involved the return of a significant portion of the stolen funds in exchange for leaving his sister out of any further consequences. The details remained vague, deliberately so, and Alina did not press for more information than what was offered to her freely. She found herself thinking often about that encounter on the dark street, about Daniel's desperate plea to protect his sister, about the strange parallel it drew to her own mother's desperate, misguided attempt to protect herself by sacrificing her daughter. Both situations had emerged from the same poisonous root, debts owed to dangerous people, desperate choices made in moments of fear, innocent people caught in the crossfire of decisions they never had a say in making. Alina began to understand, slowly and painfully, that the world she had stepped into was far more complicated than simple categories of good and evil. Vittorio Castellano, a man capable of ruthless calculation, had also shown her genuine mercy on more than one occasion, first in forgiving her mother's debt, and now, it seemed, in finding some resolution with Daniel that avoided further bloodshed. Daniel himself, a man who had stolen and lied and put her safety at risk, had done so out of a desperate love for his sister that Alina could not entirely condemn, even as she resented the danger his choices had created for her own life. Weeks passed, and gradually, life at the restaurant settled back into its previous rhythm. Alina continued her work with growing confidence, earning increasing trust from Vittorio and the rest of his inner circle. She began sitting in on occasional meetings, offering her financial expertise on decisions that extended beyond simple bookkeeping into broader questions of business strategy and expansion. Vittorio seemed to value her perspective more with each passing week, often seeking her input before finalizing decisions that affected the restaurants under her management. One afternoon, as Alina reviewed quarterly reports in her office, Grace knocked softly on the door frame, a strange expression on her face. "There is someone here to see you," Grace said carefully. "She says she is your mother." Alina's stomach dropped instantly. All the progress and stability she had built over the past several weeks suddenly feeling fragile in the face of this unexpected confrontation. She had not spoken to Marguerite since that single, brief text message weeks earlier, and she had not been prepared, not yet, for this moment to arrive. "Tell her," Alina said slowly, her voice carrying a steadiness she did not entirely feel, "that I will see her, but not here. Send her to the small park across the street. I will meet her there in 10 minutes." Grace nodded and disappeared, leaving Alina alone with her racing thoughts. She sat motionless for several minutes, staring at the numbers on her screen without truly seeing them, gathering the courage she would need to face the woman who had once tried to trade her away like an old debt finally coming due. Finally she stood, smoothed the front of her blazer and walked out of the restaurant, crossing the street toward the small park where her mother waited, uncertain of what would happen next, but determined this time to face it on her own terms. Marguerite sat on a weathered wooden bench beneath a large oak tree, her hands folded tightly in her lap, looking smaller and more fragile than Alina remembered. The weeks apart had clearly taken their toll. Her mother's hair, usually kept carefully styled, hung loose and unkempt around her shoulders, and dark circles shadowed her eyes in a way that spoke of many sleepless nights. Alina approached slowly, stopping a few feet from the bench, unwilling to sit down just yet, unwilling to offer any comfort until she understood why her mother had come. "You look well," Marguerite said quietly, her eyes taking in Alina's professional appearance, the confidence in her posture that had not been there weeks earlier. "I am well," Alina said simply. "Why are you here?" Marguerite flinched slightly at the coldness in her daughter's voice, though she did not argue that she deserved anything warmer. "I wanted to see you. I wanted to explain, properly this time, without an audience, without Mr. Castellano watching everything I say." "You already explained," Alina said. "You owed money, you could not pay it. You decided the easiest solution was to offer me instead." "It was not easy," Marguerite said, her voice cracking. You have no idea how many nights I lay awake trying to find another way. I went to 3 different people asking for loans before I ever agreed to that meeting. Nobody would help me. I was desperate, Alina, and desperate people make terrible choices. Alina felt her chest tighten, old anger mixing with a reluctant flicker of understanding she did not want to feel. Desperate people also have choices, Mom. You could have told me the truth. You could have asked me for help, instead of deceiving me into walking into that restaurant like a lamb being led to slaughter. Would you have helped me? Marguerite asked, a hint of challenge creeping into her tone despite the tears gathering in her eyes. You barely had enough money to cover your own bills after your firm closed. What exactly could you have done? The question landed harder than Alina expected, forcing her to confront an uncomfortable truth buried beneath her anger. She had not had the resources to solve her mother's financial crisis. Not then, and perhaps not even now. But that did not excuse the deception, the betrayal, the casual way her mother had offered her up as payment without ever considering how it might affect Alina's own life and safety. That does not matter, Alina said firmly. Even if I could not have fixed everything, I deserved honesty. I deserved the chance to decide for myself how I wanted to handle the situation. Instead, you took that choice away from me completely. Marguerite lowered her eyes, tears finally spilling over and tracking silently down her cheeks. You are right, she whispered. I know you are right. I have thought about nothing else for weeks. I keep replaying that night, wondering what I could have done differently, wishing I had found the courage to tell you the truth instead of hiding behind false promises about a simple job. Alina watched her mother cry, feeling the familiar pull of sympathy warring against the very real damage that had been done. She thought of everything Vittorio had said about loyalty freely given versus loyalty forced through manipulation, and she wondered if the same principle applied here, to the fragile, damaged relationship between herself and the woman who had raised her. Why are you really here, Mom? Alina asked again, more gently this time. What do you actually want from me? Marguerite looked up, wiping her eyes with trembling hands. I do not want anything from you, Alina. Not money, not forgiveness, not even a relationship if you cannot find a way to offer one. I simply needed you to know that I am sorry, truly, deeply sorry. And I needed you to know that whatever happens next, I am proud of who you have become despite everything I put you through. The words hung in the air between them, and Alina found herself unexpectedly moved by their simplicity, by the absence of any request or demand hidden beneath the apology. She sat down slowly on the opposite end of the bench, leaving a careful distance between herself and her mother, but no longer standing as a barrier against the conversation. I am not ready to forgive you, Alina said honestly. I do not know if I will ever be fully ready. What you did was a betrayal I will carry with me for a long time. I understand, Marguerite said quietly. I do not expect forgiveness. I only hoped for the chance to apologize properly. They sat together in silence for several long minutes, the autumn wind rustling through the leaves above them, each lost in her own thoughts about the fractured relationship between them. Alina thought about her new life, the stability she had built, the strange and complicated respect she had developed for Vittorio Castellano, despite the dangerous world he inhabited. She thought about Daniel Whitfield, about his desperate love for his sister, about the ways fear and desperation could push good people toward terrible choices. What happened to the people you owed money to? Alina asked eventually, breaking the silence. Are you safe now? Marguerite nodded slowly. Mr. Castellano forgave the debt, as you know. But there were other, smaller debts too, ones that have been harder to manage. I have been working extra shifts trying to pay them down slowly. It has not been easy, but I am managing. Do you need help? Alina asked, surprising herself with the question, though she immediately clarified her intentions. Not money, I mean, are you safe? Is anyone threatening you? No, Marguerite said. Nothing like before, I promise you that. Alina nodded, feeling a small measure of relief despite everything. Whatever anger and hurt remained between them, she did not want her mother to be in genuine danger, did not want to carry the weight of that fear on top of everything else she was already processing. "I should go," Alina said finally, standing from the bench. "I have work to finish." Marguerite stood as well, though she made no move to embrace her daughter, seeming to understand instinctively that such a gesture would be unwelcome, at least for now. "Thank you for meeting me," she said softly. "I know it could not have been easy." "It was not," Alina admitted, "but I am glad we talked." As Alina turned to walk back toward the restaurant, Marguerite called out one final question, her voice hesitant, almost afraid of the answer. "Will I see you again?" Alina paused, considering the question carefully before answering. "I do not know yet," she said honestly, "but I am not closing the door completely. I just need time." She walked away without waiting for a response, crossing the street back toward the restaurant, feeling lighter somehow despite the unresolved tension still lingering between herself and her mother. The conversation had not fixed anything completely, had not erased months of hurt and betrayal in a single afternoon, but it had opened a small crack in the wall Alina had built around herself, a crack that might, given enough time, eventually allow something resembling healing to begin. Back at the restaurant, Vittorio was waiting near the entrance when Alina returned, his expression carefully neutral, though Alina suspected he had somehow known exactly where she had gone and why. "Everything all right?" he asked as she approached. "I think so," Alina said. "It was not easy, but I am glad I went." Vittorio nodded, studying her face for a moment longer than necessary. "You handled it well," he said simply, before turning and walking back toward his office, leaving Alina standing alone in the dining room, reflecting on how far she had come since that terrifying night weeks earlier when she had first walked through these doors expecting the worst. The following weeks brought a strange, unexpected calm to Alina's life. Daniel Whitfield, true to whatever arrangement he had reached with Vittorio, disappeared from her life entirely, leaving no further trace of the danger that had once threatened her safety. Her mother reached out periodically, always brief messages checking in, never pushing for more than Alina was willing to offer. Alina responded when she felt ready, gradually rebuilding a fragile, cautious connection with the woman who had once betrayed her so completely. At the restaurant, Alina's role continued to expand. Vittorio began entrusting her with increasingly significant responsibilities, consulting her on financial decisions that extended across all of his business interests, treating her opinion with a respect that Alina had not expected to find in this world of danger and calculated power. She began to understand, more clearly with each passing week, the complicated code by which Vittorio operated, a code built on loyalty, fairness, and an unwavering insistence that choices, once made freely, carried both privilege and responsibility. One evening, as Alina finished a particularly demanding week of financial reports, Vittorio invited her to join him for dinner in the same private dining room where their story had first begun months earlier. The room looked different now, without the tension and fear that had once filled it. Simply an ordinary space where two people who had built mutual respect over months of careful, deliberate work could sit and share a meal together. "You have exceeded every expectation I had for this position," Vittorio said as they ate, his tone carrying genuine warmth Alina had rarely heard from him before. "I want you to know that I see the effort you have put into building trust with my staff, into handling difficult situations with grace, into finding your own way through a world that could have easily broken you." Alina felt a swell of pride at his words, though she remained humble in her response. "I could not have done it without the chance you gave me," she said honestly. "You could have simply accepted my mother's offer that night. Instead, you gave me the freedom to choose my own path." "That choice has clearly paid off," Vittorio said, raising his glass slightly in a small, informal toast. "For both of us." Alina smiled, raising her own glass in return, feeling, for the first time in longer than she could remember, a genuine sense of belonging and purpose in the life she had built for herself. Months passed, and Alina's life settled into a rhythm she never could have imagined on that first terrifying night in the restaurant. She had moved into a larger apartment, one she could comfortably afford on her steady salary, decorated simply but thoughtfully with pieces she had chosen entirely on her own, without input from anyone else, a small but meaningful symbol of the independence she had fought so hard to build. She had earned the trust and respect of everyone at the restaurant, from the kitchen staff, who greeted her warmly each morning, to Marcus and Nathan, who no longer needed to escort her home, but still checked in occasionally out of genuine friendship rather than obligation. Her relationship with her mother had healed slowly, in careful, deliberate steps. They met for coffee every few weeks, conversations that started stilted and cautious, but gradually grew easier as trust rebuilt itself in small increments. Marguerite had found steady work at a small bakery near her apartment, a modest but honest job that allowed her to pay down her remaining debts without relying on dangerous shortcuts or desperate promises to anyone. Alina had not forgotten the betrayal, had not fully forgiven it in the way that erased all traces of hurt, but she had found a way to hold both truths at once, the anger and the love, the hurt and the hope, without letting either consume her entirely. It was on an ordinary Tuesday evening, as Alina finished reviewing the final reports for a new restaurant location Vittorio had recently opened across town, that her phone buzzed with a message from her mother that felt different from all the others that had come before it. "Alina, I need to see you. It is urgent, please." Alina stared at the message for a long moment, an old, familiar unease creeping back into her chest despite months of steady healing between them. She typed back quickly, "What is wrong?" The response came almost instantly. "I cannot explain over text. Please, can you meet me tonight?" Alina hesitated only briefly before agreeing, gathering her things and heading toward the small apartment her mother had moved into after finally stabilizing her finances. The walk there felt longer than usual, every step accompanied by a rising anxiety Alina could not fully explain, some instinctive fear that whatever waited for her at the end of this journey would test everything she had built over the past several months. She found her mother sitting at her small kitchen table, hands wrapped tightly around a cup of tea that had clearly gone cold, her face pale and drawn in a way that immediately reminded Alina of that terrible night so many months earlier. "What happened?" Alina asked, sitting down across from her mother without removing her coat, some part of her instinctively preparing for the possibility that she might need to leave quickly. Marguerite took a shaky breath before answering. "Someone came to the bakery today, a man I used to know from before. He said he could help me pay off the last of my debts, quickly, without going through the slow process I have been managing on my own." Alina's stomach tightened immediately, old patterns and old dangers threatening to resurface despite months of careful progress. "What kind of help?" "He wants me to deliver something," Marguerite said quietly. "A package." He would not tell me exactly what was inside, but he offered enough money to clear everything I still owe in a single transaction. Alina felt a familiar wave of fear and frustration wash over her, the same emotions that had defined that terrible first night at the restaurant now threatening to repeat themselves in a different form. "Mom, please tell me you did not agree to this." "I have not agreed to anything yet," Marguerite said, tears welling in her eyes. "That is why I needed to see you. I do not know what to do. The money would solve everything, but something about the way he spoke, the way he avoided my questions, it felt wrong. It felt exactly like the kind of situation that led me to that terrible decision all those months ago." Alina studied her mother's face, searching for any sign of the same desperation and poor judgment that had once led Marguerite to offer her own daughter as payment for a debt. But this time, something was different. Marguerite had come to her, had asked for guidance before making any irreversible choices, rather than acting first and revealing the truth only after the damage had already been done. "You did the right thing coming to me," Alina said carefully, some of her earlier fear softening into something closer to relief. "Whatever this man offered, it is not worth the risk. You have worked too hard rebuilding your life, honestly, to throw it away on a shortcut that could put you in even more danger than before." "But the debt," Marguerite said, her voice breaking slightly. "I still owe so much. I do not know how much longer I can keep working double shifts just to make small payments that barely make a difference." Alina reached across the table, taking her mother's trembling hands in her own for the first time since that terrible night at the restaurant. It was a small gesture, but it carried significant weight, a tentative bridge rebuilding itself across the distance that had grown between them. "Let me talk to someone," Alina said carefully. "Not to solve this the way it was solved before, not through desperate deals or dangerous shortcuts. But perhaps there is a legitimate way to help you manage what remains, something that does not put either of us at risk." Marguerite looked up, surprise and gratitude mixing across her tear-streaked face. "You would do that for me, after everything?" "I am not doing it because I have forgotten what happened," Alina said honestly. "I still carry that hurt with me every day. But you came to me this time instead of making the choice alone and hiding it from me until it was too late. That matters. That is different from before." The following day, Alina approached Vittorio cautiously, uncertain how he would respond to a request involving the very woman who had once offered Alina to him as payment for her own mistakes. She found him in his office, reviewing reports from the new restaurant location, and waited patiently until he looked up, gesturing for her to speak. "I need to ask you something," Alina said carefully, "about my mother." Vittorio's expression grew serious, though he did not immediately respond, simply waiting for Alina to continue. She explained the situation carefully: the mysterious man who had approached her mother at the bakery, the dangerous package he had wanted delivered, the remaining debt that continued to haunt Marguerite despite months of honest, steady work toward paying it off. Vittorio listened without interruption, his fingers steepled together in the same thoughtful posture Alina had come to recognize whenever he was carefully considering a difficult decision. "The man who approached her," Vittorio said finally, "did he give a name?" "She did not recognize him by name," Alina said, "but she described him: tall, dark hair, a scar along his left eyebrow." Something flickered across Vittorio's expression, recognition mixed with something colder, more calculating. "I know who this is," he said. "He works for a rival organization that has been trying to expand into territory I consider mine. Using desperate people to deliver dangerous packages is exactly the kind of tactic he favors." Alina felt a chill run through her at the confirmation that her mother's instincts had been correct, that the offer had indeed carried far more danger than a simple financial transaction. "What should we do?" Vittorio considered the question for a long moment before answering. "I will handle the situation with this man directly. Your mother will not be bothered by him again. As for the remaining debt she carries, I am willing to arrange a legitimate repayment plan through one of the restaurants, honest work in exchange for gradually clearing what she owes, without any of the danger or desperation that led to this situation in the first place." Alina felt a wave of gratitude wash over her, surprised once again by the layers of complexity within a man she had once feared so completely. "Why would you help her, after everything she did?" Vittorio's expression softened slightly, something almost paternal crossing his features. "Because you asked me to, Alina. And because I have watched you build an honest, respectable life for yourself over these past months, despite the terrible circumstances that first brought us together. That speaks to your character, not your mother's mistakes. I am willing to extend a measure of grace, not because your mother has earned it entirely, but because you have earned my trust, and that trust extends to the people you care about." Alina thanked him sincerely, feeling the weight of relief settle over her as she considered how differently this conversation might have unfolded months earlier, before trust and respect had been carefully built between herself and this complicated, powerful man. Over the following weeks, true to his word, Vittorio arranged a legitimate position for Marguerite at one of his smaller establishments, a modest role that allowed her to work honestly toward clearing her remaining debts without any further danger or desperation clouding her choices. The mysterious man who had approached her at the bakery disappeared entirely from her life, whatever conversation or arrangement Vittorio had made with him ensuring that Marguerite would never be troubled by him again. Alina watched her mother's life stabilize with cautious optimism, careful not to let herself believe too quickly that everything had been permanently repaired between them. Trust, she had learned, was not rebuilt in a single conversation or a single act of kindness. It required time, consistency, and countless small choices that proved, again and again, that the lessons of the past had truly been learned. Nearly a year after that first terrifying night in the restaurant, Alina stood in her office reviewing the final financial reports for what had become a genuinely thriving business under her careful management. Vittorio had expanded his legitimate restaurant holdings significantly over the past several months, and Alina's role had grown alongside that expansion, earning her not just a steady income, but a genuine sense of professional accomplishment she had once feared she might never find again after her old firm collapsed. Her mother had continued working steadily, gradually clearing the last of her debts, rebuilding not just her finances but her relationship with her daughter through consistent effort and honest communication. They shared dinner together now, not every week, but often enough that Alina had begun to feel something resembling normalcy return to a relationship that had once been shattered so completely. One quiet evening, as Alina finished her work and prepared to leave the restaurant, Vittorio stopped her near the entrance, a rare, genuine smile crossing his usually composed features. "I have been thinking," he said, "about that first night when your mother brought you here expecting me to accept something I never wanted." "I think about it often too," Alina admitted. "It feels like a different lifetime now." "You have built something remarkable for yourself, Alina," Vittorio said. "Not because of what happened that night, but despite it. You took a moment of profound betrayal and transformed it into the foundation of a life built entirely on your own terms, your own choices, your own hard work." Alina smiled, feeling the truth of his words settle comfortably in her chest. "I could not have done it without the choice you gave me that night," she said. "Most people in your position would have taken what was offered without a second thought." "Perhaps," Vittorio said, "but I have learned over many years that the most valuable things in life cannot be taken. They can only be earned freely, through respect and genuine effort. You proved that to me, again and again, over these past months." As Alina walked home that evening, the city lights glowing softly around her, she reflected on the long, difficult journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought of the terrified young woman who had walked into that restaurant expecting the worst night of her life, and she marveled at how far she had traveled since then, not just in distance or circumstance, but in the quiet, steady strength she had discovered within herself along the way. Her mother's betrayal had once felt like the ending of everything Alina believed about family, trust, and safety. But it had, in the strangest and most unexpected way, become the beginning of something far more valuable, a life built entirely on her own choices, her own resilience, and her own hard-earned understanding that even the darkest moments could sometimes lead toward an unexpected kind of light. Alina Voss no longer feared the shadows that had once defined her mother's world. She had learned to navigate them with clarity, confidence, and an unwavering sense of her own worth, transforming the worst night of her life into the foundation of everything she had since become.